These were their last words. Their names define a movement. Their deaths a rallying cry for justice. The killing of George Floyd has protesters demanding change, led by Black Lives Matter once again.
It's time for us to stand up in George's name and say, get your knee off our necks.
The Black Lives Matter group has been fighting to be heard since 2013, and the phrase itself is now being seen on streets and screens all over the world. But how did the movement get here? How did it begin? Their message comes from an urgent need to tackle police brutality, and the statistics are stark. Police killed more than 1,000 people in America in 2019. Black people are currently 3 times more likely to be killed by police, and 99% of killings by a police officer between 2013 to 2019 have not resulted in criminal charges. But the Black Lives Matter bubble didn't actually start with police brutality. It began after the death of Trayvon Martin at the hands of an armed vigilante.
It is the story that no one can stop talking about, the shooting of Trayvon Martin.
On a February evening in 2012 in Sanford, Florida, Neighborhood Watch volunteer George Zimmerman called the police to report a suspicious person.
This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. It's raining and he's just walking around looking about.
Okay, and this guy, is he white, black, or Hispanic?
He looks black.
He's told not to approach the person in question.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Zimmerman ignored the instructions and started following 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. Moments later, neighbors reported hearing gunfire.
There's gunshots.
You just heard gunshots?
Yes.
How many?
This one.
Zimmerman accepted he shot Martin, claiming self-defense. He wasn't immediately charged. In fact, it took 44 days for him to be arrested, only after national media attention, a petition signed by more than 1 million people, and a public response from the then president.
You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. We're going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened.
A year later, Zimmerman was found not guilty of all charges by a jury of 6 women, 5 of them white. The acquittal caused outrage and sparked the birth of a new kind of civil rights movement.
Long before there was a Black Lives Matter movement, there was a movement for Black lives.
It comes as a great shock to discover that the country, which is your birthplace, and to which you owe your life and your identity, has not in its whole system of reality evolved any place for you.
BLM from its beginning was the continuation of a tradition and a remix of a much longer Black freedom struggle, but it has its roots in the labor of Black women.
After Zimmerman's acquittal, activist Alicia Garza posted on Facebook, "Black people, I love you. I love us. Our lives matter. Black Lives Matter." Garza's friend Patrice Couleur shared the final 3 words as a hashtag. On the 7th of March 2013, Black Lives Matter was first seen on Twitter. Writer and immigrant rights activist Opal Tometi offered to build social media platforms for it, where activists could connect with one another.
With this hashtag, new conversations were being created online and ultimately in our everyday lives.
Black Lives Matter is our call to action. It is a tool to reimagine a world where Black people are free to exist, free to live. It is a tool for our allies to show up differently for us.
The movement gained popularity in the summer of 2014, with Eric Garner's last words now a rallying cry, "I can't breathe," caught on video. The incident went viral. In July 2014, on a street in New York, Staten Island, 43-year-old Garner was arrested on suspicion of illegally selling cigarettes.
I did nothing. We sitting here the whole time under our business.
He died in a confrontation with Officer Daniel Pantaleo after being placed in a chokehold. He was a father of 6. Pantaleo was fired 5 years later, but a state grand jury still refused to press criminal charges.
Black lives do not matter to this system. When you, time and time again, you're seeing us being murdered, and time again, you're seeing the police go free.
Just 2 months after Eric Garner's death, another fatal shooting.
There is growing outrage tonight after an unarmed African-American teenager was shot and killed by police in the St. Louis suburb of Ferguson, Missouri.
18-year-old Michael Brown allegedly stole a pack of cigarillos from a corner store. Police officer Darren Wilson shot Brown after suspecting him of being involved in the robbery.
Police have shot this man for no reason.
Brown was due to start college 2 days after he was killed. For weeks, hundreds of people who'd never taken part in organised protests before took to the streets.
Hands up! Don't shoot!
More tear gas, more rubber bullets. Anger boiled over. Ferguson's governor called in the National Guard. Black Lives Matter was used on Twitter over 50,000 times a day. Despite the anger surrounding the case, Darren Wilson wasn't prosecuted. He resigned from the force and said he acted in self-defense.
Ferguson and Michael Brown Jr. will be a defining moment on how this country deals with policing.
After Ferguson, the Black Lives Matter movement took root and gained momentum as black people continued to die at the hands of white police. It was a cycle of killings, protests, and no criminal charges.
No federal charges. No state criminal charges.
This was all happening with America's first black president and attorney general at the helm.
I chose to run for president at this moment in history because I believe deeply that we cannot solve the challenges of our time unless we solve them together.
Racial discrimination has been around since the founding of this country. To ask that the first black president fix that is asking too much.
This is lawyer Roy Austin. He worked in the White House as deputy assistant to President Obama in the Office of Urban Affairs, Justice and Opportunity.
We took a ton of steps under very difficult circumstances because there was this narrative that we were anti-police for taking these steps.
Some of the steps taken under Obama included issuing consent decrees. These allow the courts to overhaul police departments accused of civil rights abuses, putting limits on the ability of local police forces to have military-grade weapons, and more pattern and practice investigations into police departments.
So where are they using excessive force repeatedly? Where are they engaging in discriminatory policing repeatedly?
Activists at the time thought the administration should have been doing more to dismantle systems in place that were protecting the police.
Qualified immunity is a legal doctrine that essentially shields police from persecution or legal retribution. Police officers are protected by union contracts, which make it very difficult for them to be fired. Police officers have an all too cozy relationship with district attorneys. All these ingredients taken together create a culture where police officers are licensed to kill and almost always get away with it.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
So even though Black Lives Matter representatives were invited to the Obama White House, they were also some of its harshest critics.
So their idea was, yes, show up, yes, be at the table. But if you don't get the kind of policy responses that you demand, then flip that table.
And then the table flipped totally in 2016.
Well, you see them marching, and you see them on occasion, at least, I've seen it, where they're essentially calling death to the police, and that's not acceptable.
In the years running up to the 2016 election, Black Lives Matter faced a backlash. Some started using the slogans All Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, and Blue Lives Matter in response.
When you say Black Lives Matter, that's inherently racist.
Well, I think their
Black
argument
Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter, Hispanic Lives Matter. That's anti-American and it's racist.
America's police and law enforcement personnel are what separates civilization from total chaos. I am the law and order candidate.
Donald Trump's then election marked a new era for America and the world. The summer after the inauguration, racial tensions inflamed again.
Last night's torchlight protest march by the alt-right in Charlottesville, Virginia. has eerie echoes of the past.
Violence unfolded as white nationalists clashed with counter-protesters. A car accelerated into the crowd, killing a woman and leaving 5 others critically injured. President Trump failed to immediately call out the white supremacists.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
The following year, violent hate crime in the States hit a 16-year high. Killings of black people at the hands of white police continued. It just barely made the news.
Donald Trump essentially sucked all the life and oxygen out of the media. Black Lives Matter was no longer, the lead story.
Many Americans were also enjoying the relative calm of a booming economy. African Americans had a record low unemployment rate of 5.4% in August 2019.
That shows his support for the black community. When the president says, I understand, I hear you, the president has people around him that look like me who get what's happening.
At the beginning of 2020, US election year, echoes of 2012 and 2013 hit the headlines again. Public outcry at the actions of vigilantes and a video gone viral.
We turn now to the case of Ahmaud Arbery, the unarmed African-American man who was shot and killed while out for a jog in his Georgia neighborhood.
I thought that Ahmaud's story would open the eyes of the leaders. I thought maybe with losing Ahmaud, it would help.
By the 21st of May, the men involved in the killing had been arrested and faced murder charges. But in less than a month after Arbery's death, Breonna Taylor was fatally shot by police in her own apartment in Louisville, Kentucky. No one was immediately arrested. In June, the FBI reopened an investigation. Breonna Taylor was an emergency room technician, yet her killing slipped largely under the radar as COVID-19 swept the US, disproportionately affecting communities of color.
I and many Black Americans are at higher risk for COVID.
Coronavirus is killing more African Americans.
African Americans bear the brunt of the economic downturn brought on by the coronavirus.
In Minneapolis, Minnesota, 46-year-old George Floyd was victim to these conditions. He'd lost his restaurant job and tested positive for COVID-19. Suspecting Floyd of using a forged $20 bill, police officer Derek Chauvin held his knee on his neck for several minutes. The world watched and started speaking out.
No justice, no peace! No justice, no peace! No justice, no peace!
Certainly, with 40 million people unemployed, 100,000 Americans dead, a white nationalist in office, and then a televised public lynching, those are certainly the perfect conditions for the emergence of rebellion.
All 4 police officers involved in Floyd's killing were arrested on murder charges, brought about by that video, but also in part by the strength of Black Lives Matter protests across America and the world.
People of all backgrounds, genders, and races have come together to demand change. Honor them, honor George, and make the necessary changes that make law enforcement the solution.
In the run-up to Floyd's death, President Trump's critics have pointed to his dismantling of the steps Obama took to tackle racist policing. Those things we mentioned earlier, consent decrees, limiting military-grade weapons, expanding investigations into police units accused of abuses, have all been overturned under President Trump. Some campaigners are arguing for those measures to be reinstated and enforcing policies like banning chokeholds and better de-escalation training. But the Black Lives Matter movement is calling for a more radical solution. The group is demanding the money spent on policing should instead be spent on healthcare, education, and community programs.
The institution of the police is fundamentally corrupt, and many of us believe is unrepairable, right? It simply must end in its current formation. And that's a deep cultural conversation that takes a long time for us to figure out.
He angry at 46. I'm angry at 31. You angry at 16.
3 generations of African American men stood together here, looking for solutions.
Y'all coming with a better way, because we ain't doing it. Oh my God.
A call to defund the police has been at the center of the Black Lives Matter campaign since 2016, but now it has media attention. Countries around the world are now working out what Black Lives Matter means to them, and campaigners hope that the year 2020 will be the last time they'll need to have protests like this again.